Well, good evening. Welcome to this live stream on the 20th of November, 2025. It's Martin North here from Digital Finance Analytics. Great to have you on the show this evening. It's a special show, but nice to see you here and some of the old faithfuls back, as well as some new names. So nice to have you on this evening. And we're just going to get straight into it. Before I do that, though, let me just remind you that we're not providing specific financial or legal or anything else advice. It's a general conversation only. We moderate the chat, but feel free to throw your questions and comments in. And if you would like to get my attention, if you use that Walk the World, that'll make sure that I see it in my queue. I've also enabled Super Chat, which means you can get your question to the top of the list, or indeed make a contribution to what we do around here. We don't do this for profit. We do this because we think there's a really important conversation to be had, especially now, and all support, whether it's via Super Chat, Patreon, or by other means, is greatly appreciated. Right, let me bring Robbie straight in. Robbie, welcome back. How are you doing?
Good, Martin. How are you?
Yeah, very good. It's a bit cold here today, but very interesting conversation.
Same here.
Yeah, hey, there should be summer down there. What happened? I want to recount.
It's Melbourne, mate.
Oh, okay, yeah.
When the wind blows from the south, it's always cold.
I remember I worked in Melbourne for a couple of years with the NAB, actually, and I had a flat in the centre of town, and I could never get close to understanding the Melbourne weather because it would literally would go all over the place. It's quite interesting. Anyway, look, we're going to talk this evening about China and your recent trip. And I wanted to get you on because I think in the current environment where we've got a lot of pressure from the US, frankly, a lot of anti-China pressure from the US, where we've got a lot of contention in terms of the relationships between China, US, and Australia. And some of the things that Australia is doing looks a bit weird in terms of its alignment with its main trading partner, China. I thought it'd be really good to get, if you like, from the horse's mouth, or like I said, the bull in the china shop. So tell us a little bit about the trip and what happened. And we've got a bunch of questions. I've got questions that I got beforehand. I've got questions in the chat as well, and I'm sure there'll be more questions. So let's hope it'll be a nice, spicy discussion. And but before we do that, there may be some people who don't actually know who you are. So just give yourself a formal introduction with all your new titles and everything else.
Okay, so I am Robert Barwick, the now national chairman of the Australian Citizens Party. And the Citizens Party is a political party that's been going for 37 years in Australia. It was founded in 1988, so it's not a modern splinter party. We've been around for quite a while. We're a party that stands for sovereignty, the sovereignty of our nation, and we don't believe we are a truly sovereign nation. We think we need an independent foreign policy so we can exercise our national interest on the world stage independent of our traditional alliances with the United States and the United Kingdom. And we're a party that stands for making Parliament, our elected Parliament, accountable to the people who elect it. And that is not exactly how it works in Australia. We have demonstrated many times that when it comes to some truly fundamental areas of power, it's pretty much outside of democratic accountability. And that certainly relates to the financial system, and I would argue it relates to foreign policy as well. So we call ourselves the Citizens Party because it's all about what is in the interests of the citizens, making the system accountable to its citizens, the people who voted in. But also our slogan is citizens taking responsibility, because we fundamentally believe that the key to a successful political system is the engagement of its citizens, not voting once every 3 years and then set and forget, actually staying engaged. And our success, such as we've had in policy debates, as you know, Martin, you've been participating in it with us for quite a long time now, is based entirely on getting citizens to engage in the process. So that's me and the Citizens Party in a nutshell. I've been at this. It took me 32 year to achieve my dastardly goal of taking over this party as its chairman. And by the time I did, all it meant was an extra work for me.
Well, that's right. Unfortunately, those who can do, and those who can do and get more work, right? I always found that whatever I did, because I was more capable than perhaps some others, I always end up with more stuff to do, which is just the way it goes, isn't it? But
That is the way it goes.
but the point is, this is a really, really important observation about the nature of politics in Australia and the
Yeah.
lack of accountability and, frankly, focus from the major parties. It's a major problem for the country. And so, therefore, it's really important that we've got voices that stand up for the people. And, one of the things that I try to do on this channel is to really emphasize, listen to what people in Australia are actually saying. I do surveys on households, and that gives you a perspective.
Yep.
And look, the fact is that both of the major parties, they're two cheeks of the same bum. They're going in much the same direction, but not in the right direction. So this is a really important conversation. Now, let's go to China, because you had the opportunity.
Well, hang on.
Yeah.
Before we do, sorry to interrupt, but before we do, I'd like to do a quick update on one of our normal subjects first.
Go for it.
And tie that into China, actually. And then I'll do we'll talk about China a bit more. No. So interesting development this week, where there was the hearing of the House Economics Committee, its annual hearing of the CEOs of the big four banks. So Matt Comyn and the new CEO of Westpac, Anthony Miller, and the new CEO of ANZ and the CEO of NAB came to Parliament to get a what they call a grilling, a grilling with a limp wet lettuce. But anyway,
like a little stroke, isn't
it? Yeah. And one of the things, Martin, you may have noticed if you saw it, is there's no continuity on either side. All the members of the committee are new to the committee. Pretty much all the CEOs except Matt Comyn are new to their jobs, right? And so because there's no continuity, there's no accountability. Anyway, but I want to highlight one thing. Leading into it, the day before, Westpac made news on a subject that's near and dear to our heart, because it announced that it got it wrong on regional banks, and it's committed to regional Australia, and it's going in and opening up new branches. And they made that announcement the day before the hearing to shape the narrative, right? And that's always a tactic that the banks do, and Westpac certainly is a bit of a master at it. So we put out a statement on the sins of Westpac, because it turns out that everything they claim was just all talk. They essentially said, "Oh yeah, we got it wrong. So we're opening up new branches." And then one of the people went on ABC radio and said, "We're opening up new branches, RR service centres." And the journalist spotted, was sharp enough to spot, hang on, there's a reason that they changed that description. And he said, what's the difference? He said, "Can you go in off the street and get cash over the counter?" And she goes, well, we haven't settled on that, probably so. Rubbish. She was lying, and she knew she was lying. That's why she was stammering. They've picked 3 towns. Now, this is a bank that's closed since its peak, since the peak of its network. Westpac has closed 588 branches, which is 70% of its entire, that's just regional branches, 70% of its entire regional network, 588 branches. So as one of the CEOs of one of the community banks said, no wonder you can announce a moratorium, because they said they were extending the moratorium on branch closures for another 3 years. He said, it's easy to announce a moratorium when you've got no branches left to close. But they were trying to shape the narrative that, hang on, we're coming back and opening up branches. No, they're not. A branch is a legal definition. It means you take cash and you give change. You take cash deposits and you give change. And that includes notes and coins. So not ATMs, actual proper engagement over the counter with your customers. And this is so typical of the banks. Now, the good news is that they're doing this because of us. 2 years ago, you can read a James Ayres article in the Financial Review, March 2023, so 2.5 years ago, where he got together 4 executives from the big four, not the CEOs, just below them, and they were boasting how they're closing regional branches so they can push people into cashlessness. They were boasting about it. They're now in damage control, right? They're not boasting about that anymore. There's been a backlash. We've led the backlash. They're in damage control, but it's all rhetoric. It's not in their actions. It's in their rhetoric, right? And they genuinely have contempt for the Australian people, their customers, and the government, because they know the government's not going to push them to do anything. And so anyway, we're not buying it for a second. We will not get anywhere in Australia unless, as you know, we bring back a government bank that's there. We can have it operating through post offices that's there to provide a service in every community. And only then, when the banks have to compete with such an entity again, will they lift their game? That's the only way this is going to work. So with that in mind, now Martin's, for the audience's benefit, Martin's got a second stream there. He can see what's on my PowerPoint. So Martin, I've queued up the PowerPoint to this page. I want you to show it now to the audience. When we're going through China, because you can't help but see things through the prism of your own interests, one of the things that jumped out at us, my wife and I, was the number of banks literally everywhere. There were bank branches on every corner. I mean, seriously. And the most common bank branch that we saw was this one, the Postal Savings Bank of China. So my wife took a whole bunch of pictures. This is only a few of them that can fit on one screen. Every time she saw one, she took a picture of it, just to show people that this is not even China trying to make a point. This is just that I know there are places like South Africa. Andy Schmuller has talked about how the culture in South Africa is different as well. There are plenty of places around the world which don't have the attitude to their customers like our banks do. And China is one of them. They genuinely provide a service, even though, Martin, you might have experienced this in your visits to China, but it's now 2025. The digital payment system in China is incredibly sophisticated. It's the best in the world. It is so easy. Even the beggars. In 20 days, I saw 4 beggars, I kid you not, 2 in Shanghai and 2 in Xi'an. Even the beggars have QR codes so that people can give them money on WeChat. You could exist entirely digitally in China. The digital coverage, the signal, the connectivity is brilliant everywhere. You'd have to go right out in the desert to get a weak signal. You could live entirely digitally in China, yet they provide branches everywhere for their banks. And let me see, I've got another one here. This is me outside a survey. This is the cover of a TikTok I made about using cash. You can see the Chinese yuan in my hand there. The government mandates all businesses must accept cash, and I might get some questions on social credit. And let me tell you, it's a pile of garbage. What you've heard about Chinese social credit is absolute garbage. And one of the paradoxes you need to think through is, if this absolute total surveillance system by the Chinese government is real, why do they mandate? You get fined in China if you're a business and you don't accept cash. We saw signs warning businesses to that effect. Cash is legal tender, and the government requires the businesses to take it. So I thought, well, I'm going to test it. And I used cash in as many places as I could just to test it. And every single place accepted cash. The only time I couldn't pay with cash was when I only had a 100 yuan note and I'm trying to buy a bottle of water for, say, 3 yuan. And the poor shopkeeper looked at this big note and looked at the amount of change he had to come up with. And I took pity on him because I was just doing it mostly as a stunt, right? Just to test the system. And I would then whip out my phone and pay with on WeChat. So this is just and this the reason I'm raising this point is not to highlight this as a virtue of China's. It's a normal thing. It should be considered a normal thing what they're doing. Our system is screwed up. Our system, where the banks are in charge. In China, the banks certainly are not in charge. Right? In China, the government's in charge. In Australia, the banks are in charge of the government. And we've seen it case after case of that. And our banks get away with treating us with contempt. And you got to go around the world and sometimes see this reflected in the way other cultures work. And that one jumped out at me. So I just wanted to mention that before we got started properly on the China subject.
And Robbie, just on that, because I think that the whole issue of digital payments and digital IDs and those sorts of things, clearly there's a lot of mis and disinformation all over the place on this at the moment. Certainly in Australia, it's becoming harder and harder to use cash. We've argued, I was involved with you in terms of the initial program to try and actually get the Senator's inquiry into use of cash in Australia. We got that, and we got a very good report that said, well, actually, there are things that need to change. Nothing happened. So it looks as though the banks are actually ruling the roost in Australia, whereas what you're saying in China is they're part of the fabric of the society there, but it doesn't sound as though they're actually the ones in charge.
They're definitely not the ones in charge. The I mean, shouldn't be surprised, but there's a whole economic history to China where China did open up to a more market economy, they call it, or you could call it capitalism. But what they ended up with was a fusion, and that's what a lot of even Western countries had more of a fusion of socialism and capitalism, or market forces and some kind of government intervention. We all had that fusion. We went down the neoliberal path where we weakened the government side of that and put the corporations in total charge. That's essentially what neoliberalism did. China came from the side of more government control, went down the path to allow market forces in, right? Free enterprise, private enterprise, but never gave up the full reins over the economy, because why should they? That would be stupid. And so their banks are not in charge, and you just couldn't argue with that. Plus, I remember having got into this debate about China, as you and I were talking before we started. When I first became vocal about China, and you interviewed me on your show in 2018, and etc. In those years, I didn't know Chinese people. I didn't have any connection with I'd never met anyone in the Chinese government, in the Chinese embassy, or anything like that. This was just a position that we took as a party, and sorry, I was going to. Anyway, I was going to make a point about that. That sort of jumped out of my brain for a second. If it comes back,
bring it back.
If it comes back to, yeah, exactly. So my position on China has been shaped by. Oh no, that's the point I was going to make. I met the first people in the Australian Chinese community who reached out to me. They reached out because they saw the noise I was making, and then they became interested. And I remember going to Sydney and having a meeting a few old codgers in a Vietnamese restaurant, jolly old guys, and they actually were talking about how one of the things that gets confused in China is a lot of things get blamed on the Communist Party, which are actually really better understood to be more part of the longer Chinese culture and its Confucian heritage going back thousands of years. And one of the hallmarks of that is that in Chinese culture, businessmen were never allowed to be involved in politics. They kept the business people out of politics. They didn't mind business people, but they didn't want them making the political decisions, right? Because by definition, you would have a vested interest. Right. And so this is a long-standing feature of Chinese culture. I think it probably came up at the time because that's when the Chinese government had actually intervened on Jack Ma and Alibaba, because Jack Ma was being feted in the West and he was a very rich man, etc. And they weren't reacting to him being a rich man, but he was about to take Alibaba to this position where it would start to really dominate the Chinese economy. And they had to intervene and say, no, you're not going to do that. A corporation is not going to have that much power in China. And as part of it, Jack Ma, he was never arrested. He was never disappeared. He just stepped back from a public role in society for a while, which is also a bit of a Chinese tradition. And they were explaining to me that dynamic. Anyway, that's interesting to know that about this country, its culture, because that kind of culture is still in display, I would argue, in the way the Chinese government deals with businesses today. They're happy to have successful businesses. All the big Western banking brands are there. Martin, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, HSBC, Standard and Chartered, they're all there. They're great big skyscrapers in all the big cities with their brands on them. But you can be sure they don't run the country. They don't have a fraction of. They're there to make money. The Chinese government doesn't mind them making money if they do it honestly, but they don't run the joint.
Interesting. I used to work for Citigroup years ago in Australia, and what's fascinating to me about that was, although this US-based bank was actually growing around the world, actually the most strongest and most powerful footprint that they were looking about growing was in China, because it was huge population base, huge economic growth, and greenfield opportunities that they could see there. So that there's always been something really weird about. On one hand, for example, people and politicians in the US white-handing China all the time. Yet on the other hand, a lot of the big businesses in the West were investing in China at the same time. And I never understood that. It just didn't make a lot of sense. So it was more sort of political smokescreen than anything else.
There's a bit of that.
Mm.
Why don't I go through a bit of a picture show,
Yep.
and you can so you can interrupt me with questions. I don't want to I don't want to overdo the picture show, but I'll go through it fairly quickly. I've got a few pictures here just to give people a sense of what we did. So interrupt me with questions, but then at the end we can just make it much more of a Q&A. And I apologize beforehand because I know it's a bit of a cliche. Ever since the camera was invented, people would go on trips overseas or something and come back and gather friends and family and bore them shitless with the slideshow, right? So anyway, but we did it for a reason. And so if you can cue the PowerPoint.
Just before, let's just make one thing a little bit clear. One question I had for you was, how did you pay for this trip? Did the Chinese government pay for anything?
No. So we called this the China Study and Goodwill Tour. It was organized by a very experienced travel agent / media Chinese media personality in Sydney named Richard Yuan, who has a company called ABC World. And Richard is someone who's become a friend of mine. He attended our conference last year, and he suggested that he could organize a tour like this. He was born in China, but he's an Australian citizen now. He's been here nearly 30 years. So he put the study tour together, and it was entirely a private affair supported by the Citizens Party. We made it broader than the Citizens Party, so it wasn't a Citizens Party branded tour, but it was a Citizens Party supported tour. We advertised it among our members. Everyone who went paid their own way to go. Now, myself and my wife, as leaders of our party and representing our party, the party paid for us. The Citizens Party paid for us to go. We paid for our son to come with us, our 14-year-old son, so that he could have the experience as well. It's not that expensive to get around China, but it's, we got to, for 20 days, it can build up. The expenses can build up. But at no stage was any of this funded by the Chinese government whatsoever. And in fact, the Citizens Party has never, ever, ever, ever taken any money from the Chinese government or any other government. And if you doubt that, understand, because this is one of the easiest slurs that gets thrown at a party like us. Understand that what you're accusing us of is a crime. It is against the law in Australia. We can't even take donations from New Zealand. People in New Zealand are not allowed to donate to our party. We have supporters in New Zealand because New Zealand is it's even written in our constitution, for crying out loud. We've got supporters there who, support us and support our ideas. All they can do is subscribe to our magazine. They actually cannot make a donation. It's against the law to do that. We do not break the law as a party. We've never, ever, ever taken any foreign money, and we never take a red cent, mind the pun, from the Chinese government.
And just one other quick question on the way in, because people in the chat are talking about handlers, Chinese party, Disney tour, free handlers. Were you actually escorted? Were there handlers, or could you go anywhere you wanted? How did that work?
Well, so our Australian organizer, Richard, he would, in every city we went, he would have, we would be met by a private tour guide for that city who he paid for, and it came out of the overall expenses of the trip that we all paid for. But because we're a party, we also got to meet different levels of city and provincial and one meeting of people from the federal government. And to organise those meetings, every city has what they call the Foreign Affairs Office. We would, in some cities, be met by someone of the Foreign Affairs Office to escort us to that meeting, right? So because we were international guests representing a political party, right? So because there was a certain formality to that got involved. But in general, the answer is no. And it was a pretty busy tour, but the few days that we had where there was a gap in the schedule so we could genuinely have free time, we just all split up and we're on our own. So one of those days, for instance, was in Shanghai. And it's like you got the whole afternoon, do whatever you want to do. And the tour didn't even stay together. People just split up and went their own way. And that's where I got to go down some away from the really busy Bund, uh, Nanjing Road retail area. Very, like the biggest crowds in my life I saw in that area, right? Just absolutely packed with people. Got a bit further away from that, and walking down side streets, etc. And it was completely just myself, my wife, and my son were just completely walking on our own. We're not being shadowed by anybody, no handlers. And I must say, one of my main comebacks to that is because you can choose to believe me or not. But I will say one of the things I've concluded from having this experience, because this is my first visit to China, is I've sort of taken a vow to argue less, even though that's pretty hard for me because I'm happy to argue on some of these subjects. But my main argument is going to be go see it for yourself. If you don't believe me, go and see it for yourself. Because I think you'll find, unless you go there unless you're Joe McCarthy and have that point of view, or Andrew Hastie, and have that point of view where you're so paranoid and where you're literally interpreting every person walking down the street as a potential Chinese agent, you're not going to feel like you're in a 1950s Cold War movie. It's just not like that at all. Very, very different.
Very interesting. In fact, my wife Jill, who unfortunately died a few years ago, went to China on a very important speaking tour in the education sector, and traveled around various cities. No handlers, no external intervention at all, and they actually had total freedom to meet the academics and have conversations about anything they wanted. Went out on the streets, and she came back and said to me, "It's so different from the way that it's represented in the mainstream media in Australia." And she said, "I don't understand why it's just not being told straight." And I guess that's part of the questioning, isn't it? Let's go on to the presentation, because I think you'll see some of this. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so I really like this picture. This is on the wall of the city of Xi'an, and it's a well preserved wall. This is one of the ancient capitals of China. In its day, it was the biggest. Around the time of Christ, this was the biggest city in the world. Anyway, they have some people dressed up in period costume, etc. But what I really liked was they had two sets of guards marching around, and one was all men and one was all women. And these women, they look pretty impressive. They look like they could handle themselves. So I enjoyed taking that photo. All right, let's just go through this. So I've broken this up into into certain categories, and I'll comment as we go. So the first is people. Now, I actually haven't traveled much in Southeast Asia, so I know a lot of people who've commented when I've commented on this, talk about Vietnam is similar, etc. But I was just blown away. It's funny how some things get stuck in your head. The motorbikes, the electric scooters, there are hundreds of millions of them, and and I'll show another photo of this in a second. It's a real contrast with some of the things you see in China are so 21st century, so advanced, so slick. And yet on the ground level, there's just hundreds of millions of these people on scooters going about their very busy lives to make a living and get ahead. Because the Chinese government isn't that big on welfare. They're big on work, right? They provide opportunities to work, get out there and work. And the people that, lifting themselves out of poverty kind of thing. And remember, this whole economic experiment started in 1978. There are people over the age of 50 in China who their whole life, or it's not even 50 years yet, but like if you're like 60, in your memory, you have a memory of going from being the poorest country in the world to a very advanced place, but it's happening in stages. There's 1.4 billion of them, and you see a lot of this. This was very, very touching, and this was not organized at all. We flew into Hainan Island, the city of Haikou, and we spent our first few days there, and then we took a flight from there to Nanjing, and the plane was full of Chinese people and 18 white people, essentially, white Indian, somewhat some Indian Australians, etc. And so the flight attendants asked, "Who are you?" And the gentleman sitting beside me there, that's Richard Yuan from Sydney, and Richard explained that we're the Study and Goodwill Tour of China. And so they asked us to stay seated when the plane unloaded so they could get a group shot with us. And I'll point out the gentleman on the other side of the aisle from me. That's John Lander, and John Lander was Australia's first deputy ambassador to China when we opened up relations with the People's Republic of China in the 70s. So he was the deputy ambassador from 1974 to 1976. He worked at the Department of Foreign Affairs until 1996. In his career, he was 3 times the head of the China desk at the Department of Foreign Affairs. So he was also the ambassador to Iran for a while in the 80s. But the greater part of his career was building the Australia-China relationship. He's now a member of our party and a very important advisor to me, because he contacted me just like I mentioned before, people in the Chinese community did, because he saw how outspoken we were when no one else was, objecting to this American-directed turn of foreign policy against our biggest trading partner that we were objecting to. And John has become a very close friend and an important advisor. So he came on this tour, and he added a lot of gravitas to the tour. The Chinese are very respectful of the elderly. They're also very respectful of titles. They were blown away to meet someone like John and have his history. And the fact that as deputy ambassador, he had met Mao Zedong, he had met Zhou Enlai, the big identities of Chinese history, that blew him away even further. So we got this this was a special case, this particular photo, but we got special treatment by the people we were able to, who understood the significance of our tour as we went. This is just, I had to throw this in. This is in Nanjing. Some of Richard Yuan's friends met us at this restaurant and gave us a feed when we arrived there. But they're so generous. When we left the restaurant, there was 18 of us on the tour, and they had 18 boxes lined up. And inside each box was 2 ducks. and they gave us all a box each to carry, and it became a bit of a problem because this was just the beginning of our tour, and we didn't have the time to stop and eat these ducks, and we're carrying these boxes of ducks around, and it became a standing joke. Can we get rid of the ducks? Now, if this was an American tour, we would have been able to walk outside on any given street and give them away to all the homeless people, because there's thousands of them everywhere you go in America. This was China. There's hard. Like I said, I saw 2 in Shanghai, 2 beggars, and 2 in Xi'an in 20 days. I see more homeless people when I go to downtown Coburg outside our office. So that wasn't that easy to do, but eventually it was just a funny experience. It reflects the generosity of the people that we were meeting, and just a curious little problem that we had to resolve. I had to take a photo of this. This was the owner of this hotel was so impressed that we were staying in her hotel. She put on a 26-course banquet for us. Now, the only reason I'm adding that in is if you want to do we're hoping to put on more of these China Study and Goodwill tours. If you want to be a tourist in China, go ahead. You should. The Chinese government has 30-day visa-free travel for Australians and 80 other countries. Go ahead and try it. But if you want to actually have an experience where you get to also intersect people at different levels, like we were able to do, come on one of these tours and you might get to experience a banquet like this. And that's the banner we used to carry around for our group photos. But we took this photo. There's the motorbikes contrasted to the very glitzy inner city. You see, like that's competitive with all the big cities in the world. That photo, I think that was in Nanjing probably. But the streets are full of the motorbikes as usual. This was an event called the Entrepreneurs Club in Xi'an, which is a purely private affair. These are friends of Richard Yuan, and they were excited that he was in town and he had these Australians with him, so they put on quite a fantastic spread for us. The little old lady in the photo down the bottom there, she's hand painting fans based on all the flowers that represent the months of the year. In China, they've got flowers that represent each month of the year, and we're all given a present of one of these fans based on when our birthday was. Everyone there is toasting with Baijiu. If you've never had Baijiu, it's quite potent. It's around 50% alcohol. They serve it to you in little tiny glasses, so it doesn't seem like it's much, but they tend to toast a lot in the dinners, and by the end you can be quite happy. this is in the city of Chongqing. Again, very, very advanced, very 21st century, but you've still got people in this guy with the cart there. That's a hot pot cart. He's actually on the street. You can't tell he's on the busy street, but he is on the busy street right beside big buses. We took that photo out of the bus, and he's just going about his business to set up his hot pot cart, because there's quite a, it's almost a libertarian street economy, Martin. I mean, it's like you got an opportunity to make a business, go and do a business. Get involved in business, right? Start a business, make it work. Whatever you want to do, go ahead and do it. Okay, economy. There's a coal-fired power plant. Now, unfortunately, I don't want to. I took that because I wanted people. They do have coal-fired power in China. They've got plenty of it, and they're opening up a lot more. These are these very efficient coal-fired power stations. But when it comes to energy, China does everything, literally everything. They invest the most in every form of power, from renewables, solar and wind, to coal, to nuclear, literally everything. And they do it on an enormous scale. I've got some other photos. I didn't of things like the windmills in places like Hainan. I didn't take that, but that's just representative of the infrastructure, some of the infrastructure. Free trade. Here's an example of how China handles its economy. It often does things on a local basis to have initiatives that can benefit that local area first, and then expand. The city of the island of Hainan on the 18th of December is going to be a free trade port. The Chinese have a list of all possible commodities in the world, and they've designated 75% of them will be tariff-free going into that port as of that day. If you open a business in Hainan, you will get a tax rate of 15%. That's it. So they're doing this to attract business and to attract trade. If you go and live in Hainan, your personal income tax will also be 15%. Now, Hainan is the smallest province in one way, in actual area, because its designation of a province includes a great big chunk of the ocean around it. It's actually the largest province in technical area. It's the smallest province in population. It's only about 10 million people. But part of this free trade port deal will be, if you're an international business and you export a product into Hainan, and then in Hainan, you add 30% to its value. So you're employing locals. You're investing in the area. You're employing locals. But if you add 30% to its value, you then get tariff-free access to the entire China market. And you can imagine how attractive that will be. And this is an initiative by the Chinese government to make sure they supercharge the development of the Hainan economy as well, like they've done with many other places around China. And to get a sense of the value of the Chinese market, this is from the same presentation. You see those two those two overlapping ovals. Hainan is in the middle, the island in the middle. And if you can't tell from the bottom one has the Chinese language, you might be able to see the number 7 in it, and the top one has 14.1. What that actually means is those two circles are around the top market. The Chinese market is 1.41 billion is the size of the market. The bottom market around ASEAN is 700 million. And so the purpose of that diagram is to show that that island is located strategically, economically to intersect those two markets. But even then, you can see just the scale of the Chinese market. It's absolutely enormous. This is where old meets new. This is on the island of Haikou. Fantastic brand new roads, and literally brand new roads, brand new infrastructure. But what you see there is the poor farmers of the region. They look at this infrastructure and go, "Great, we can dry out our corn on it." And so mile after mile after mile, you see farmers with these little carts, and they're drying out their corn, spreading it out, sweeping it around, picking it up, and taking it where they want to go. And they're totally free to do that. There would be a million regulations in Australia to stop farmers from doing stuff like that. In China, everyone, it's just accepted. Well, it's your infrastructure too. Use it. Now, we'll come back to the ghost cities in a minute, but this is an example of the modernization of housing. There are old apartment blocks in China that are old and ugly, and they're right beside them. There's developments of brand new apartment blocks that are modern and nice, and also other forms of housing as well. Not everyone wants to live in an apartment. So These are pictures from the city of Nanjing, or at least the ones with the houses there are example of that. Um, I talked about banking earlier. We took a lot of photos of banks. These are some of the other banks that aren't the Postal Savings Bank. You saw those photos. Um, these are photos of the big four commercial banks of China, right? And China has the biggest banks in the world. And these banks here are the policy banks. These are the secrets to China's economic success. The Agriculture Bank of China, the China Development Bank, and there's two others. These are the state banks that have driven the whole economic development of China. This is the key to China's economic success by any measure. And it's why, if we want to go back to the success that we need as a country, we need to bring back our own policy banks, our own national bank. Infrastructure was brilliant. Like I'm at the Nanjing train station to catch a high speed train to Shanghai, and I was sort of looking the other way, and the train comes in quite quietly, and I turned around. And there's this really sleek nose of a train coming right beside us, and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, that looks pretty futuristic. And then you jump on, and you get to you can't really tell how fast it's going. You look at the screen. And that's how fast we were going, 347 kilometers an hour. The equivalent of Canberra to Sydney in 1 hour it took, and easy on, easy off. Whereas, we should have had a high-speed train from Canberra to Sydney decades ago, and we're still not even thinking about it. There's just, more infrastructure. This is the city of Chongqing. They call it the city of bridges. Fantastic. And these are big bridges, right? Fantastic infrastructure. That's a bit blurry. Apologies if you can't see it very well. We didn't actually get to visit this. This is us landing in Shenzhen, which is near Hong Kong. That's the Hong Kong Macau Bridge. And John Lander told the story when he was first told there was going to be a Hong Kong Macau bridge. He didn't believe it. He said, no way will that happen. Well, now there's effectively two of them. These are massive bridges that partly go under the water, under sea as well. So, it's like we can do it. All right. This is I really love this picture. We went to this science city called Hangzhou. This is where Alibaba is headquartered, actually. But read that caption below. This is a message that is in this display of this science city. And you've got to read it as the government is talking. And the government's saying, I am responsible for providing sunshine, rain, and dew, while you're responsible for blossoming and flourishing. And it's a metaphor. The government's saying, we'll build the infrastructure, go about your business. Innovate, do whatever you want to do. Be successful at business. We'll provide the infrastructure. That's the model. That's the bargain with the people. And this is one thing occurred to me. There's a whole industry in China for building models of cities, because we went to lots of different displays and we saw these model cities everywhere. And this is an example of this particular Hangzhou city, which is also a very beautiful city. And they were giving us this display of what's on the plans, and we said, well, when's this? When you're going to do this? And they said, well, it's 80% done now. We went to a place called the City Brain, which is how this is a central control hub for the whole city. This is a sort of thing that would feature in a dystopian movie about, government control. But they openly showed it to us. It works on real live data. And what it's about, it's about making the city work properly. And so it's two things it prioritizes is the traffic and the elderly. And it's voluntary for the elderly, but they can sign up to this program. And then by signing up to this program, their homes get monitored in case something goes wrong. And so they can have the quickest reaction from ambulances, et cetera, to get there and treat them if they need help, et cetera, et cetera. And so they got this way of sort of monitoring the situation, even down to the temperature of the houses. But people have to sign up for it. If you want to sign up for it, you get to participate in that program. It is not mandatory. The city traffic, though, is a different thing. It's about, we're going to make the city work. And so they even employ drones in case some drongo is parked in the wrong place. The drone will fly down and say, hey, move your car. And you get 3 warnings, apparently, before you get a fine. And I thought, well, that's probably a bit different to Australia as well, because our authorities would always fine first. Um, this is near Shenzhen. I think this was the day I called you, Martin. There's a this John when John Lander was the deputy ambassador and he visited Shenzhen. It was a fishing village and a state farm. The state farm has now been turned into an advanced, cutting edge industry innovation center. And we got to tour it, and it's just about. There's nothing the Chinese won't invest in to stay progressing, right? And you can be you can be an American politician and twist that around to say, hey, the Chinese, they're so obsessed with beating us and then conquering the world that they're doing all this stuff. They're not. This is what they've got to do to keep pulling their people, uplifting their living standard. And they invest in it. And this is the thing. We don't invest in that. We expect the banks to make billions of dollars, rain down, trickle down on all of us, and somehow we're all happy, right? And things will work out. Well, the Chinese don't think that way, and they're not doing this to get us. They're doing this to improve them. So it's just all about investment, and a fair amount of collaboration as well. They're always inviting international collaborators to come in and innovate with them. I'll just jump through this quickly. We got to tour places like TCL, which is an advanced screen manufacturer, right? They make a lot of. They've probably made the screen in your mobile phone, and if they haven't, this company has BYD. Now they even put up this sign welcoming us because they got this digital sign there. We went to the BYD showroom. BYD is now the world's biggest car maker, and I put that little graph on the corner there because that's the explosion in its revenue. Last year was 107 billion US dollars, and it's just exploded. But they don't just make cars; they make everything, including probably a whole bunch of. If TCL hasn't made your screen in your phone, BYD probably did for Apple or whatever. This is a truck factory in Xi'an, which is this is in a shed that's 20 acres large, and the company doing this has 50 of those sheds, right? They do things on a massive scale. This is an agricultural centre that's part of the Belt and Road Initiative. That's a joint project with many other countries, and this is doing cutting edge agricultural research, refining techniques, etc., etc. We did this. So this is, as you can tell from what I'm going through, this is not a normal tour. We asked this tour to be shaped around the areas of our interests as a political party, right? Interest in economic development, etc. Right, I'll just jump ahead. This is another innovation area outside of Chongqing. That's my next car you can see there. I'm looking forward to it. I didn't get to see it fly, but I'm sure it does. This is Elisa called this old meets new. This is the old area of Chongqing and the great big new tall skyscrapers there. A little bit of history. Just indulge me for a second. We visited two places that were quite important. This was the first day. On the island of Hainan, there's a memorial to Australian soldiers who were killed in World War II by the Japanese because they were prisoners of war, and they were part of what was called the Gull Force. And we went there, and John Lander and I gave speeches because September was the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II and the defeat of the Japanese. So we gave speeches to that effect. But one thing you got to reflect on is Australians know a lot more about the European theatre of war than they do about the Asian theatre of war. And they barely even know about these stories. Now, Governor General Sir Peter Cosgrove in 2015 actually helped to open this. You probably can't quite tell there, but it was a stinking hot day because Hainan is tropical. It was suffocatingly hot. But it was an honour to do it, and we laid flowers as well. To pay respect here, and the local village maintains all this, right, out of respect for the history of Australians helping the Japanese resistance the Chinese resistance against Japan in World War II. A little known history. And this is the other place we went. This is the Nanjing Massacre Memorial. The Nanjing Massacre was the Holocaust of the Asian theatre. This is where the Japanese imperial forces massacred up to 300,000 Chinese people in this city in 6 weeks. And we know they did because you can go and read the old Japanese newspapers to this day bragging about it, bragging about how the Japanese soldiers would compete to who could kill the most people the fastest. And the guy who got the record killed 107, I think it was, Chinese people in 1 hour, and he beat some other bloke who killed 106. It was a horrific massacre in 1938, and the Chinese have this memorial to it, and it's quite profound, but as you can imagine, quite disturbing. And the caption there is, remember history and cherish peace. And that idea of cherishing peace is, frankly, my fundamental motivation for everything I do on this subject. And this is inside the purpose of the memorial ceremony for Nanjing massacre victims is to recall that every good-hearted person yearns for and believes in peace. We do not intend to prolong hatred. The Chinese and Japanese people should live in friendship from generation to generation and make joint efforts for the peace of humanity. And then this is, if you can see that, this is the Muslim quarter of the city of Xi'an, and we went for a walk down in the Muslim quarter, and I ate a lot of halal food. I'll just jump over that. This is some of it. We got to meet these with city and provincial and government officials because we're a travelling political party, and there was a certain formality to these meetings often. But then some of them involved dinners, and once the baijiu flowed, they became quite jovial. And I have to say, what you end up pinching, these are just normal people. These are that most of them. Almost all of them are members of the Communist Party of China, because there's 100 million members of the Communist Party of China. 1 in 15 people in China are members of the Communist Party. But if you look at the picture on the right there, the man with the glasses, he was one of the officials in this city of Nanjing. He sat beside me. He was not a member of the Communist Party of China. He was a member of one of the other 8 political parties in China. Now, I don't know if the listeners knew there were more than one party in China, but there are more than one party in China. There's 8. And they all have they have a division of labor. They're all represented at the main big functions in Beijing when they have them. But they specialize in different things. This particular party, I forget its name offhand, was a party founded by Chinese people in America. Chinese people living in America founded this party and exported it back to China. And it's a party that specializes in international relations. So believe it or not, but it's true. That man is not a member of the Communist Party. He's a member of this other party. And then I'll just indulge me for a second. There's the joint photo there where I'm in the middle, and there's 2 Chinese people beside me, and John Lander on the Ed and Richard Yuan. This is at East China Normal University. John spoke at it. Those 2 Chinese people are Chinese professors who are experts in the Australia-China relationship. The reason we're highlighting them is because in 2020, Scott Morrison barred them from coming to Australia. They're not allowed to visit Australia, even though their whole career is around their expertise in the Australia-China relationship. And they are just mild-mannered professors. That's all they are. The one with the head of hair there, he must have the secret to eternal youth, because he still looks like he's 12 years old now, but he was Bob Hawke's interpreter in 1986 when Bob Hawke visited China as the Prime Minister of Australia. So he's got some secret. But it is one of the, this is the sort of thing that infuriates me about this country, and especially about that foreign agent, Scott Morrison, an agent of the American government, who is now going around being paid by the American government and cashing in on this AUKUS scam he set up. That bastard set out to absolutely sabotage our relationship with our most important trading partner, to the extent of barring these 2 gentlemen from visiting this country. And you're going to hear me talk a lot more about this subject, because it is absolutely and utterly shameful that we treat this country in this way. And all they are is a good trading partner. They didn't change the subject. And it's just like the microcosm this year of Trump. Trump gets elected. It's a microcosm of what happened in 2016. Trump gets elected and he rips the rug out from under the whole international trading system. And then within less than a year, he's gone back and he's basically had to take things with China back to where it started, right? The Chinese didn't initiate any of this. He did it. And then, of course, people start throwing accusations in all directions. And the same thing was the case in 2016. And our party took the position we did, because we're saying we're not going to be, our country should be a sovereign country. We have an important trading relationship with this country. We're not going to be dictated to by a foreign power. And that's the consistent position we've always taken. And these 2 guys, to me, sort of represent the lowest of the low of how our relationship degenerated, and we should change it. If we're serious about stabilizing the relationship, we should change it. I'll calm down again now. Let's just wrap this up. I had to throw in this photo. This is in the city of Chongqing. That was the biggest reception table we got to eat at, but it was very nice. This is me giving and John Lander giving speeches at the Beijing Foreign Studies University. One of the things you see in China is English language signs are everywhere, literally everywhere. Redneck Australians complain when the occasional Chinese written sign gets put up, because our tourists like Chinese tourists. We used to have 1 million of them come to Australia and pay money and help our economy. And so out of politeness, we'd put up the occasional Chinese language sign. People would have the Australian newspaper would have a meltdown over it. You go to China, there's English language signs everywhere, literally everywhere, because they're polite. They like people to be able to find a way to get around and do things. Well, the Beijing Foreign Studies University specializes in teaching Chinese students English. And that's why they've got a good relationship with Australia, or had before Scott Morrison. And this is the final meeting. This was the highest level government official meeting we had. This is just an interesting meeting. We're a political party, the Citizens Party, and this is the section of the Communist Party that deals with other political parties. So because we're a visiting political party in town, we're invited to meet with them, and that's the group photo from the meeting there. And I found the policing overall to be light touch, very light touch. I saw people breaking the law, walking, like things like jaywalking in front of the police. The police didn't care. I didn't think any rules applied to the motorbikes. And this is just something they sort of innovate where they have a police presence. They'll put the police on a bit of a platform so they get a bit of a view in a busy area like a mall. They've got police in little buggies. They got the bus there is actually inside a plane, an airport, big area of airport. The police need a place to be based, so they just drove the bus in and they park it there. The police are they're just not an oppressive presence in the country at all. And I'll finish on this. This is just because someone asked about the Uyghur question. This is the Muslim quarter of Xi'an. Lots of halal food. We don't have time for that video. This was at BYD. I went to the washroom, they call them, i.e. the toilet. And as I'm going around the corner, there randomly right in front of me, if I was a Muslim, I could also go to the prayer room, because that's how China persecutes Muslims. It provides prayer rooms for them. And this was in the hotel we stayed at in Nanjing. The breakfast buffet, half of it was halal food, because that's how the Chinese persecute Muslims. They provide and label halal food for them. Anyway, just a few things like that. I made a TikTok, Martin, where I made the point that one of the reasons you got to go to a place is because, you don't get, and I'm telling you, what I've shown you isn't going to do justice to, in my view, to China, because what you don't, you form an impression of a place by the million impressions that you absorb at once, right? And it's just all these little things that add up to, what your wife's experience was, etc., what my experience was. And it's such a contrast to what we're told and what I've been combating on social media. And so when I'm looking at China, naturally I was looking through the prism of the arguments I've been having over the years, right? And so you can factor that into it as you will. But you go there, you have a million impressions at once. It forms an overview in your mind, and that's what you've seen, right? So that's my experience with China. I'm open to any questions you have.
Okay. Well, there's quite a few, but one of the ones that came up earlier on in the chat was trying to reconcile the story that you're portraying here with the concept of China buying up Australian assets left, right, and centre, and it would be good just to try and square that circle, right? And I'm thinking the Port of Darwin. I'm thinking of some of the other resources. Not so much the trade stuff, but China companies buying up Australia. So let's just put that in perspective, shall we?
Yeah, well, first of all, the whole thing is 100% complete lie. It's just a whole pile of garbage. And it was one of the reasons we got into this debate, because Barnaby Joyce, and for whatever reason, took it upon himself to become the big spokesman for it. And the Australian newspaper and the Murdoch online stuff like news.com.au, every time a Chinese company or any entity that had any kind of Chinese investment in it would buy an Australian asset, the screaming headline would be China buying up Australia. So from 10 years ago, we just started going to the DFAT figures. And it's extraordinary that this is the biggest economy in the world by purchasing power parity measurement. It's our biggest trading partner, yet it has never got bigger than the 10th largest foreign investor, the 10th largest, behind countries like Belgium and Luxembourg. There's number 10. Its maximum foreign investment to Australia got to about $100 billion maximum. It has been shrinking in the last 6 years. The Chinese investors have been selling out. One of the claims was even the claim that China was the biggest investor in Australian farmland was a complete exaggeration. And the reason why is because the biggest investor in Australian farmland, foreign investor, is Britain, because it always has been, right? And the biggest overall foreign investor in Australia is the United States, close to $2 trillion of foreign investment here. Britain is second. And like I said, China's number 10. So not even close to those. But in the farmland one, which was the cause of great hysteria, the whole claim was based on the fact that of everything that was connected to China in terms of Australian farm assets, 87% was one holding, was one economic entity. And that was the former Kidman company, which was bought by a company which was 1/3 Chinese and 2/3 Gina Rinehart. So a minority Chinese stake in Gina Rinehart's cattle company was counted as Chinese ownership, which was such a big area of land that was 87% of all Chinese farm ownership in Australia. And if you don't accept that's an exaggeration, then we're not going to agree. That was a total exaggeration, but that made for good headlines. And the other one that was, Queenslanders would probably recognise this, there was a big hullabaloo when a Chinese company bought Cubby Station, because with Cubby Station in Queensland also came the water rights, and that was almost more important than the land. And then the headline was China's buying up our water. China's buying up our land and China's buying up our water. No, a Chinese company, a cotton manufacturer, bought Cubby Station, because this was a vertically integrated company, bought Cubby Station to be part of its vertically integrated company. We chucked up such a stink about that, or the China bashers chucked up such a stink about that. On national security grounds, the federal government ordered them to divest half of it to an Australian company. That company happened to be Macquarie Bank, which is just a predatory speculator. And so we were more comfortable with Macquarie Bank, a predatory speculator, taking ownership of our water than a Chinese company that was actually going to use it for what it was for, growing cotton to make clothes. But anyway, so total exaggeration, never been an issue. Port of Darwin was leased, not sold. It was leased to China in 2015, 10 years ago. It has had multiple security clearances ever since. We didn't decide to take it back. And this is quite important. If you don't know the details, go look at our website and follow it through. The Australian government, every time the Australian government looked at the Port of Darwin, the Chinese can't take it anywhere. The head of ASIO said they're not going to be able to use it for spying on us. All they did was they took it from being a loss-making entity to a profitable entity. Caveat, you and I have talked about this before, Martin, the Citizens Party opposes privatisation. We just believe the government should own its own assets and invest in its own things, right? So we would never have done it. But the neoliberals, Labor and Liberal, who believe in privatising everything, they did it. They sold it to a company that actually invested in it. In 10 years has made it going from being loss-making to profit-making. And then because the Americans have a facility in Darwin, because they're taking over all the top end, because they're turning us into a big military base, they complained about it. Trump told our government to take it back, and that's why we're taking it back. Under orders, not a sovereign decision.
Yeah, and just talking about that, I'm quite interested in some of the recent developments between the agreements between Australia and the US, particularly in the military sphere. And of course, we've got the massive investment in submarines that may or may not arrive at some time in the future. And we've also got the issue of more US military being cycled through Australia. And Rex Patrick, actually, through an FOI, I think, revealed some stuff the other day relating specifically to, the possibility of south of Sydney, not far away from Wollongong, maybe
Yeah.
another base
Yeah,
there as
that's
well.
right. Yeah, yeah.
And I'm trying to get my head around the sort of and it goes back to what I always say. In Australia, we seem to have this idea that China bad, US good. Anything China related, tagged bad. Anything US related, tagged good. And yet we've had Trump tariffs. We've had the US militarization of Australia, you could say. And to my mind, that creates more contention rather than less. Surely Australia should be more independent rather than actually being reliant on either of these two entities.
Well, even Mike Pizzullo, who is a rather sinister character in Australian politics, and part of the American takeover of our politics, he acknowledged that, and I think people need to take stock of this. From 1945, essentially, the end of World War II, until 2011, no government in Australia, none, allowed the Americans to be a military presence here. You had a form of American presence. You had facilities like Pine Gap and Northwest Cape, etc., but they were also contentious, right? We've just celebrated the 50th anniversary, or commemorated the 50th anniversary of the dismissal of Gough Whitlam. Part of the story there was Gough Whitlam was genuinely going to tell the Americans when their lease on Pine Gap expired that it wasn't going to be continued, right? And they certainly played a role in his dismissal, because without Pine Gap, because the world is a ball, America's on one side up here, Australia's on the backside down here, and if it's not for Pine Gap, America doesn't have 360-degree view of the whole world. Pine Gap gives them that. And they certainly didn't want to give that up. But so we had those things, but we didn't have bases. We didn't have permanent military bases, because you do that for wartime, not peacetime. But Julia Gillard changed that in 2011. And since then, it's just got bigger and bigger and bigger. The permanent American military presence here. In fact, the only money that the Albanese government is directly spending on public housing in Australia is for the housing they expect American service personnel in Perth to live in when we have a nuclear submarine base over there, right? And this is part of the big American takeover and build up of this country. That's what you do for war, and we should be alarmed as hell about it and oppose it, because what we're doing is we are not a threat to China, and China's not a threat to us. But if we allow all this American military build-up here that's aimed at China, then we make ourselves a threat to China. And then we have to count into China's calculations of what it will do in a war, right? And this is entirely self-inflicted. One of the reasons I am quite outspoken on this, and was from the beginning, is because I got to know Malcolm Fraser, a hard man of Australian politics. A guy whose 8 years coincided with the Cold War. He was no pushover, but he absolutely denounced Australia's lack of sovereignty. He wrote a book, Dangerous Allies, in 2014. He denounced Australia's lack of sovereignty. He said we need to take an independent foreign policy, because this is the path we're taking on now is going to lead us to disaster. And he was definitely right.
Yeah, and Malcolm Turnbull and a couple of other ex-prime ministers as well have been speaking out about this quite recently, haven't they? And questioning the poodle following the dog, as it were,
Yep.
and essentially degrading our autonomy as a result.
Yeah. Well, and in Malcolm Turnbull's case, he's talking about the submarines. The catalyst has been the submarines. It's the worst deal in history. If it was a private business deal, if it was the government doing a business deal with a private company, Martin, someone would go to jail over this.
Yep.
Right? It's a scam. But it's government to government, And so we've said to the Americans and Brits, here, take $368 billion. And now we've got a group of 8 naval experts at the University of New South Wales going, well, it's going to be at least double that. Anyway, $368 billion. Please provide us submarines when you can. You can pull out any time you like if you can't do it. And when you and if and when you do pull out, you don't owe us any money back.
Yeah, here's a check.
Here's a check.
Yeah, and that check, of course, is taxpayer funds, which could be spent on other things if it wasn't going down that route. And you know, to my mind, the whole concept of we're in a pre-war world, which is what, of course, some politicians and some militarists are now saying, is very much driven by the economic military complex that seems to be driving. If you look at the stock markets, you know, those military stocks are doing quite well. Thank you very much. And you know, Dick Cheney, who died recently, responsible for a lot of mayhem around the place, he made a lot of money out of that. So there is a whole lot of vested interest in all of this. And what I find frustrating sometimes is that we seem to be missing the true story because of the whitewash that's being painted and the stories that are being told. And of course, we've got to ASPI and you know, other things in Australia who are actually part of the spin. So I come back to you've been to China, right? And you've seen the technological innovation, the growth of the economy there. Did you get a sense that China is you know, knocking on our door and going to invade next year?
I'm glad you asked. And as you know, we genuinely didn't set up this question, but I was about to come to it. So you've asked it at the perfect time. Let me tell you this experience I had in Beijing, and it was all because of Australia. So we went to 20 cities, sorry, 9 cities in 20 days. Beijing was the last city. And that photo of me giving a speech at the university there, one of those 2 gentlemen who's not allowed in Australia was taking us around their museum, and they've got all these photos of all the people who visited over the years, etc., including Bob Hawke and my old mate Colin McKerris, who was very instrumental in helping to start the relationship as well. So I'm touring this. Now, I was there for the 20 days of the tour. Elisa and our son were there for 2 weeks, and they had to come back. So Elisa sent me a video from while I'm walking around. She sent me a video from Channel 10, and it's Hugh Riminton, and he was narrating this 3-minute clip where they're promoting this hour-long anti-China, whatever anti-China rubbish they were going to do. The visuals, though, for below the narration were of the Chinese soldiers in Tiananmen Square marching in lockstep, and they're the best at it in the world, right? They're really good marchers, and the missile display, right? Now, everybody should be familiar with what I've just described. We see it on our TV screens literally every day. That is the image of Australia, of China, that gets pumped into our brains by the mainstream media every day. And so I'm looking at this video and I'm instantly recognizing it, seeing it as something very familiar to me. But at the same time, it was completely jarring. It was like it's like being in a concert, classical music concert, listening to Schubert or something, and someone blows a vuvuzela. Because the reason it was jarring was this. In 20 days, I had not seen one soldier in China. Not one. Not a military vehicle, nothing. The next day, because we got to Beijing that evening, the next day, walking around Tiananmen Square, I saw some soldiers standing at attention like the beefeaters in London, outside government offices, right? But that's natural. What I realized when I saw this, this is not a country that has militaristic overtones whatsoever. Do they have a very impressive, powerful military? Of course they do. But I can tell you, your average holiday in America, you're going to see a lot more displays of military power, just military, imagery, vehicles, soldiers or whatever, than I saw in 20 days in China until I got to Beijing. But the Australian have been conditioned to believe that when they think of China, they think of Tiananmen Square bristling with soldiers and missiles, all looking at Australia. I think that's why when they use the footage where the soldiers are marching on, they all look like that, like they're all looking at us. And we had this little instant pang of fear. Oh, they're coming to get us because Uncle Sam said they are. And that's why Uncle Sam has to put his weapons here to protect us from them. And it just adds to my total cynicism of this whole picture. It is not what China's like at all.
And what about Taiwan? Because, of course, that's the other thing which is thrown about as the potential spark. And people are drawing parallels between Ukraine and what's happening there. Um, Again, my sense is that there's probably a bit of a myopia on the whole Taiwan issue too.
Well, it so happens that this is actually a subject in which John Lander is quite an expert. And every speech he gives it on the status of Taiwan. And the reason why is this, Martin, because 50 years ago, John was there. He worked in DFAT on the agreement between Australia and China to recognize the People's Republic of China. We wanted to recognize the People's Republic of China. Why? Because, well, we under Whitlam especially, we saw that we're now part of Asia, etc. But there was always a bit of an ulterior motive. China's this massive market, right? We always wanted to, have access to that market. So, and the Chinese said, fine, we're happy to, open up relations with you, but there's one condition. And there was only ever one condition. And it's as very smart experts like Kishore Mahbubani, the former foreign minister of Singapore, is very strong on this. China, as I said, it's our red line. You need to acknowledge that Taiwan is a province of China. There's one China, and Taiwan is a province of China. They didn't ask us to say the Chinese government is the rightful government of China. They were just it was a recognition of the territorial integrity of China includes this province of Taiwan. Knowing that, because essentially the actual legal status of Taiwan is there is an interrupted civil war. Right, there was a civil war. The nationalists lost. All they had left was Taiwan. The civil war was interrupted. It's been interrupted to this day. But any Taiwanese independence is not independence, it's secession. And Abraham Lincoln, who by many people recognize him as America's greatest president, killed 650,000 of his countrymen, stopping a section of his country from seceding. Right? And the Chinese look at it exactly the same way. They're happy to be very patient. They intend to reunify at one stage. They want to reunify peacefully. As one Chinese person explained to me, if you love a woman, you won't rape her. They've got no intention of going to war and killing many Taiwanese to take it back. But the problem they have to deal with is that Taiwan is a country that when America was starting to build its post-World War II empire, didn't have one before the war, Taiwan became an excuse for America to be a military presence in the Western Pacific, far away from its shores, and it doesn't want to give that up. And it's in there it's in there messing around in Taiwanese politics like crazy. Except that worked when with American investment, Taiwan had a much higher living standard than China. That worked, but now China is catching up. Now, the Chinese income, the average income is still lower than Taiwan's income, but because its purchasing power parity is so great, that's not as obvious as you think it is. The standard of living in China is great. The Taiwanese economy is completely intertwined with the Chinese economy, right? And so there's a absolutely growing trend in Taiwan to support the reunification side. The only way the Americans were able to, the current president of Taiwan is from the Democratic Party, and they're the party that sometimes threatens to declare independence. But they only rigged that by having 3 candidates for president instead of 2, and so he got the highest vote, but he didn't get a majority. And the parliament, the makeup of the parliament of Taiwan, is the majority of seats are held by pro-unification parties. Right, and so that and it just shows you that the reality on the ground is the Taiwanese people are not interested in a war. The Chinese people are not interested in a war, but the Americans are trying to stir up as much trouble as they can. And the Chinese have said to them, you know our position. They've said to Australia, you know our position. You agreed to this one China policy. That's all we asked. We didn't change our position. You're trying to change it, and we're not going to let you get away with it. So the ball's in our court on that one, Martin. Right? Do we have the right to do that? Does Scott Morrison have the right? I mean, this bastard's now going around making money out of the war machine that he created. He created the tensions to justify the war machine. Now he's making money out of the war machine with his equally bastard mate Mike Pompeo. Mike Pompeo said that he was going to run for president in 2024. He didn't end up doing it. But in 2023, he announced he was going to run, and he said his number one policy would be independence for Taiwan. That was him saying in 2023 he was going to start World War III. These people are utter lunatics. They're also religious lunatics to boot. They think they don't care about World War III because they think Jesus is going to come back in a rapture and take them all out to heaven, and we can all die in flames. As far as they're concerned, they are utter lunatics. They shaped our foreign policy on this. They should be in a mental asylum. Right? And the Chinese have had to deal with this from the West constantly. So I'm saying learn a bit of history, respect the people who were there, like John Lander, and understand why he's motivated to always talk about this position, because we agreed to the condition and it's not our right to change it, knowing that by changing it, we're risking World War III. Why would we do that? It's insane.
Well, we're coming towards the end of the show, Robbie. So was there any question that you expected to get and you didn't get?
Did we talk about the Uyghurs?
Well, briefly, but you made the point that there were facilities available, but there were a few questions in the chat and a few people beforehand saying, well, hang on, the Uyghur story is the biggest story that's not being told in China.
Well, and it's because now, so I didn't go to Xinjiang. I mean, there is a limit. It's actually a very, very big country, China, and Xinjiang is the far western autonomous province. So I didn't go there, but the reason I did highlight the Muslim things is because when the worst of the Uyghur claims were flying around like crazy, there was just this narrative that China hates Muslims because they're Muslims. So even what I've shown you should be enough to say, well, okay, whatever is happening to the Uyghurs, it's not because they're Muslims. Can we at least put that to bed? As the former foreign minister of Singapore, George Yeo, said, America hates Muslims. America hates Chinese. But for some reason, America loves Chinese Muslims. It's a joke. It's just ridiculous, right? Just get that part out of your head. Whatever's happening there has nothing to do with being Muslim, or else it would apply across the whole country. The actual reality with the Uyghurs, and so I have sources, and I wish I had used a photo there, but one of my sources is an Australian named Jerry Gray, and I take credit with launching Jerry's YouTube career because he has a very prominent YouTube channel now. Look it up, Jerry Gray. Jerry Talks China, and he lives in China. He's an English teacher there, but he's a bike rider. He was a policeman in the UK. He moved to Australia as a prison officer in Australia, and then since 2005 or whatever, or later, he's been a teacher in China. But he's a bike rider, and his thing is riding his bike around the whole country. And he's ridden his bike around China twice or something with his wife, including he's ridden throughout Xinjiang twice. And in 2020, I interviewed him on our show because he was responding to these claims of 1 million people in concentration camps. Well, when you make a claim like 1 million people in concentration camps, there's actually logistics involved in that. There's got to be places to put them. You can't hide the concentration camps that house 1 million people. They're actually visible. There was a 19-year-old at Aspie named Rusa, Nathan Rusa. We called him Satellite Boy. He would produce these stills of Google Maps or Google Earth, whatever, shots, and say, see that dot there, that's a Chinese concentration camp. And so Jerry Gray started trolling Nathan Rusa, saying, give me the coordinates, I'll go there. Because he made the point that when he rode his bike through Xinjiang, he wasn't stopped from going anywhere. There was more security in Xinjiang than in other places, but there's a reason for that. But in general, he wasn't stopped from going anywhere. And the reason there was more security is because for the 10 years up until 2017, 1,000 people had died in terrorist attacks in Xinjiang. 1,000 people. Horrific terrorist attacks. machete massacres in train stations. There was a mine these Uyghurs had descended on and killed 50 miners in their beds in Xinjiang. And that was just in the 10 years. There'd been 30 years of terrorist attacks. Because what China deals with is not Muslims, it's separatists. These are people who call Xinjiang East Turkestan. Um, and what they were doing was recruiting people to join ISIS over in the Middle East. It's not known whether it's at least 3,000. Some people estimate as many as 30,000 Uyghurs went over to the Middle East and joined ISIS and went on rampages across Syria with ISIS, beheading people, etc. These they became influenced by the worst Wahhabi Islamist sect, and that China was not going to tolerate. But as plenty of people pointed out, well, given the same experiences, what would America do? They'd go and carpet bomb the place. That's what they would do. That's their track record. They would go and carpet bomb the place. What China did is said, okay, we're not tolerating this, so we're going to deal with this. And they introduced a de-radicalization and poverty reduction program. The Uyghurs were, in many ways, I've had Chinese people describe them to me as like, compare them to the Australian Aborigines in very outback places in terms of the poverty that they lived in. That's what made them susceptible to the kind of extremism that they were getting caught up in, for using religion, but it wasn't about religion. The extremism came hand in hand with the religion. And so the Chinese government set up all these vocational training schools. Even by ASPI's own accounts, Martin, that when ASPI did a report on this and they named these places, you could actually go and find the reports from these schools, and you could see the photos of these schools where they're being taught how to cut up watermelons, for crying out loud, right? But anyone calling these photos concentration camps was just having a laugh, but they knew the media wasn't going to be showing these photos, right? So the people were just going with the headlines, and it absolutely wasn't true. Now, if you're a convicted terrorist, China had to crack down on terrorism as well. And if you were a convicted terrorist, you would have probably been executed. I'm sure that's true. But so there was a hardcore terrorist element that went to jail. But what they called concentration camps were all these vocational schools where plenty of people stayed over during the week but went home on weekends. And what I've learned, just like I've concluded that you can't prove a positive view of China on social media. And that's why I'm telling people, don't take my word for it, go and visit yourself. You shouldn't fall for a negative view on China based on the snippets on social media either, right? There's people there that are telling you, but China offers 30-day visa free. Anytime I want in the future, when I go to China, I can go to Xinjiang and see it for myself. I just didn't have time this time. One day I will go to Xinjiang and see it for myself. But just to go back to Giorgio again, when you're getting this information, all these East Turkestan separatist groups now that go around promoting the East Turkestan agenda are all headquartered in Washington. And so to quote Giorgio again, the Singaporean foreign minister, who Australia awarded a member of the Order of Australia, we like him so much. He said, America hates Chinese, America hates Muslims, but it loves Chinese Muslims. You connect the dots.
Well, Robbie, we've come to the end of the show here. Last closing thought from you. I mean, I think what you've tried to do here is to paint a very different picture from China from the typical one that is being shown through social media and in Australia, which is good. And I've always believed it's important to share different ideas and different perspectives. And I guess the idea of find out for yourself is probably the big takeaway.
It is. I made this TikTok saying it's my number one argument now, right? I think it's a masterstroke by the Chinese. So let me leave you with this thought. Now, I've always been influenced in this whole debate by the fact that I got to become politically conscious to a degree while the Cold War was still on. Now, I was quite young. I was born in 1974, right? So, the wall came down in 89, right? So I'm 15. I can remember actually where we lived in Childers, just outside Childers, near Bundaberg in Queensland. We had a some new guy moved in down the road, and my dad was always very friendly, and he'd always go and introduce himself. And this guy was Eastern European looking. Oh, where you from? He's from Romania, and we're getting to know this guy. And that you wouldn't talk about uncanny. That was the same like weekend that Ceausescu was overthrown in Romania, right? And then the next week, I'm hearing about all these deaths from Romania. I thought, I just met someone from Romania. I never really considered this place Romania before. But a few years earlier, my dad had I was with my dad one day, and he was talking to one of his mates, and they were very strongly religious, and we went to these churches that had quite an American flavour. This guy was talking to my dad about the fact that the news of that year, whatever year that would have been, like 86 or something, was that the Russians had joined the Americans in the International Space Station. And this man, his name was John. He was the nicest guy in our church, very mild-mannered guy. But he was having a fit over this. He said, my dad's name's Billy. He said, Billy, we're up there with the Russians. What are we? The Russians, Billy. They're in the space station. And I'm thinking, I'm 12 years old, and I'm thinking, what are these Russians that John's having a meltdown? What is this about? And that was my first introduction to this thing called the Cold War. And I'm starting to learn about it. And I read a lot. I didn't have a TV. I read a lot, reading all these books about the Cold War, etc. So I remember really well what that was like. And what I've seen is the parallel now is that there are people who want to start at least a new Cold War, and they're well on their way to doing it, and maybe even a hot war. But Martin, one of the features of the Cold War, as you would remember, was the repression in Russia and in China, granted. But I know the Russians, remember the Russians, the Soviets weren't allowed to travel. They weren't allowed to leave the Iron Curtain, right? It was hard enough to get in. They could never get out. And that was one of the proofs of the moral superiority of our side, because we had the high living standards. We didn't have the bread lines, and we could travel, and those people weren't allowed to travel to our side to see how much better our system was. Remember that? Well, just go by that. Remember that and compare it to the Chinese government today. The Chinese people are allowed to travel wherever they want around the world. Kishore Mahbubani points out that, COVID interrupted it a bit, but it's coming back. Before COVID, 300 million Chinese would leave China every year as tourists going around the world, different places, and that 300 million would come back. And it's not because to leave the country they had to give over their firstborn who was being held at the barrel of a gun in case they didn't come back. They came back because that's where they lived. That's where they were making their money to be able to even afford to go overseas, and they had a good life and an improving life. And not only is that true, but the Chinese government has implemented this masterstroke where they have identified 80 countries and Australia is one of them, where you get visa-free travel into China. And they're just saying, you come and see us for yourself. The Chinese government is not that good at American-style sophisticated propaganda of demonizing other countries, etc. They're not that good at it. They're always on the defensive because they're the ones who are always being demonized. And they're just not that good at it. So they've come up with a way that I think is the best possible way. So don't argue with me. Don't argue with the Chinese government. Go and see it for yourself.
Yeah, Robbie, well, thank you very much. And as we come to the end of the show, if people want to find out more about you, where do they go? citizensparty.org.au and the Citizens Report on YouTube. But the website is quite dynamic, updated regularly. You can stay on top of all our campaigns there, but also we publish the information we put out on foreign policy, etc. It's all there. So tune in and get involved as well. Don't just have a look. We're on a membership drive. We're getting registered in all the states across Australia. We need to get the ideas of our party into Parliament. So sign up, get involved, and you're welcome to participate. Robbie, thank you very much for that. I think very interesting insights. As you would expect in the chat, there were people very positive, very people negative, some people sitting on the fence, but that's part of the great discourse, and we can be grateful for the chance to be able to facilitate that conversation, at least for now. So thank you very much. Links and things are below.
And just to Michael Puffin stuff 1078, I don't know. He said nobody is going to China. Well, that's not what I saw. I saw plenty of people there.
Exactly. Well,
Anyway,
thank you.
come at me. Follow me on Robbie at Robbie Barwick on Twitter, and that's where I'm engaging in the most combat on this. So you can follow me there too.
Robbie, thank you very much. Take care. I'll take you offline. I'm going to close the
Thanks,
show
Mark.
now. See ya. Well, there we go. I hope you found that interesting and thought-provoking. Links and things below. Just that next Tuesday, 8 p.m. Sydney time, Tony LaCantra is coming back, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the latest market dynamics. He was at a recent gold conference, so we'll look at some of those things. And the dogs are still here. They've been wobbling around a bit, but are ready for their next adventure now, which will be lunch and then a walk. So thank you very much for spending some time with us this evening. Please like and share this show. And I'll look forward to seeing you on the next live show next Tuesday, or indeed check out the recorded shows. There's a new show up every day. This is Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics signing off. Take care. Bye-bye.